Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. The GOP majority in the House is busy getting to work after the 112th Congress convened Wednesday. Among those who was sworn in is Representative Steve King, representing Iowa's 5th Congressional District. He is a member of the committees on agriculture, small business, and the judiciary. He joins us now from Washington. Welcome back to Newsmax TV, Representative King.
Well, thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate it. And this is a really good day here in the Capitol.
Well, I want to ask you about that. You've just returned from the opening day ceremonies of the new Congress. What was the mood like inside the Capitol?
Completely different. The transformation that took place, I can only imagine what it was like for the Democrats in the first week in January of 2007 when they won the majority from us. I would rather look back at the time in 1995 when the new class came in, they elected in 94, when the Republican majority swept in for the first time in 40 years. This probably wasn't as dramatic as that. I remember watching that on television, and I was swept up by it all because people didn't believe that could happen. This one was more predictable and it was more predicted, but still, I mentioned in the earlier conversation that it feels a lot like sweeping into that chamber, coming in there to swear in. It's like having practiced all summer long and then going down through the tunnel out into the stadium, into the bright sunlight, and the first game of the season. That's what it feels like. Everybody's pumped up and charged, and we have some of our playbooks all studied, and we'll see if this team is as good as we think they can be.
Well, House Speaker John Boehner said today's swearing in was about the American people, not its politicians. Are you satisfied that the GOP leadership really got the message that voters sent them in the midterms?
We'll see. It's got a good start. And having scheduled the repeal of Obamacare, I don't know if it's H.R. 1, but it's scheduled to be the rule debated on Friday and the vote on it on Wednesday. That is a big statement to make, and it's a big principle to put out. The 87 freshman Republicans, I don't know of any of them that won't vote to repeal Obamacare. In fact, I think all Republicans will vote to repeal it, and we will get some Democrats, probably some of the Democrats that didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker today, will vote to repeal Obamacare.
Now, a number of newspapers are calling this vote largely symbolic because beyond the House, it's not expected to go anywhere. What then would be the next step for the GOP?
Well, I'd say that that's completely ridiculous, and that's their best talking point that they have. When you put out a piece of policy which is pull Obamacare out by the roots, pull it out lock, stock, and barrel, and you pass that out of the House of Representatives with a resounding vote, perhaps unanimous on the part of Republicans, and more than likely significantly bipartisan, send it over to the Senate, that becomes a huge hot potato to sit on his desk. And he's going to have to figure out how to deal with that with 21 Democrats in the Senate up for re-election in the fall of 2012. So I don't think it's beyond the reach. I think we can push the Senate hard, and I think we've got a reasonable chance to force a vote in the Senate. And if it comes up for a vote in the Senate, it will pass on repeal. They will vote to repeal Obamacare in the Senate. Then the president can veto it, and then we'll start the process over again while we shut off funding to Obamacare in each of the appropriations bills.
So you sound very optimistic that Obamacare could be repealed.
It's one of my life's missions, and I won't call the life's mission accomplished when that day comes, but I wouldn't have started on this if I didn't think that it was possible. And I and Michelle Bachmann both introduced legislation immediately after the passage of Obamacare, and I pushed a discharge petition that accumulated 173 signatures in the Pelosi Congress. And here we are today with a new majority. Some of them swore in today that would not be if it were not for that discharge petition. And some of the Democrats that went home because they didn't sign the discharge petition and because they voted for Nancy Pelosi. I'm optimistic. We can do this. We've already won the debate with the American people, but we have to maintain ourselves in the polling in America so that the American people need to stand behind us, understand how important this is. We cannot reach the next level of our destiny as a nation if we are going to be saddled with the albatross of Obamacare. Let's put that around his neck, not the neck of the American people.
Let's talk about cuts beyond the health care law. Republicans want a minimum of $100 billion in cuts, but they have been very tight-lipped about where those cuts might come from. Where are you hearing that the GOP wants to cut?
Well, I think that strategy of tight-lipped, I would not have appreciated that when I first came into this Congress. I put together a balanced budget, or almost got it done back then in the 2003 and 2004 years, and I learned a little bit there. If you start rolling out your cuts early, what you get is all the constituency groups lining up every effort that they can to try to preserve their section of the budget. They never want to share their pain. They want to push it off on somebody else. So there isn't much that's being said about where the cuts will come from, whether they're across the board, whether they're program eliminations. I think there'll be a lot of authority within the committees in order to do that. So if I knew, I don't know that it'd be wise for me to say, but at this point, rolling back spending to the 2008 level is a very likely thing. I think that will happen. And how we address the major three entitlements will be what really dictates whether this Congress gets the job done to pull back this overspending and brings us back to a constitutional, fiscally responsible Congress.
Now, the national debt this week hit $14 trillion as Congress prepares for a vote on whether to raise the debt ceiling. Some Republicans are adversely against it, while others say they will consider it, but only if significant spending cuts are made, especially to unfunded liabilities. How will you vote?
Well, if the leadership is willing to bring a balanced budget to the floor so we can keep score on who's for balancing the budget, then I'll vote to extend the debt ceiling. If they're not willing to bring a balanced budget to the floor, then I'll vote no on extending the debt ceiling.
Do you think a balanced budget amendment has a shot now?
No. I think that's too hard for too many, and I don't think leadership will allow it to the floor. It was too hard in 2003, and it's gotten harder, especially much harder under the Pelosi and Obama leadership. So I think it'll be a very difficult thing to do, but it's important for us to put a marker down and make the statement to the American people on how difficult it is to balance this budget, on what kind of pain it will take, how broad it will be, and how deep we'll have to cut in order to do that. And until we put the target up on the wall, we're not going to be able to ever reach the goal of balancing this budget and paying down the national debt.
Okay. If the debt ceiling isn't raised, do you believe that the U.S. will default on its debt? And will there be draconian economic consequences as the Obama administration wants us to believe?
I think the debt ceiling will be raised. I just don't imagine that there will be enough that will vote no on that it would block it. So I don't know that I can speculate beyond that. There are a lot of arrangements that can be made between the President and this Congress, the House and the Senate, to get to the point where they can get the majority of votes to raise the debt ceiling. But I think we need to drive a very hard bargain. And my bargain is, I just want to announce to the American people with a recorded vote on the floor of the House what it takes to balance the budget in the next fiscal year. That should not be too much to ask.
Okay, well, this push to make spending cuts is unfolding just prior to the March 4th deadline for Congress to fund the government. Some have toyed with the idea of a possible government shutdown. Do you think that it could actually come to this?
It could come to this. I think they'll find a way to fund the government on through, perhaps with a continuing resolution on till midnight on September 30th at the end of the fiscal year. And it's possible that raising the debt ceiling could be the one that puts the block on it, so that there could be a shutdown. But truthfully, I don't think Congress is going to willfully shut down this government. I think if it happens, it will be President Obama who does that, not this Congress. But here's the scenario that I think needs to play out, and it's what I support. And that is, get the negotiations done for raising the debt ceiling, do what they need to do to get those votes to get that handled. But a very important item, again, as I mentioned, was the repeal of Obamacare, and that also is a component of the end of the CR on March 4th when the funding runs out. The new appropriations bill that will extend that funding to the end of the fiscal year must have, in my view, language in it that prohibits any of the funds from being used to implement or enforce Obamacare. If we do that with the extension of the funding, the CR, then we can put an end to Obamacare right here in the month of February, send that over to the Senate and see what they do with it. It's time to play hardball with President Obama. If we can shut off the funding in a CR or whatever the next funding bill is to get us beyond March 24th, if we can do that, we can get this fight over with, and we can get on with the business of creating jobs and stimulating the economy and allowing for the free markets to actually create those jobs.
What kind of help do you expect to get from Democrats? We saw bipartisanship when the GOP and some Democrats brokered the tax cut deal during lame duck. But Senator Lindsey Graham said the GOP gave in too much and capitulated. Do you agree, and how much common ground can we really expect in the days ahead?
Well, there's a famous quote, let's see, James Russell Lowell, who said that compromise makes a good umbrella but a poor roof. Useful in the time of politics, but completely useless in the case of statesmanship. So I want to reach out to Democrats and work with them where I can. I'll tell you that I'm a mellower fellow, having spent 4 years in the minority. And there's another side of this when they may well be in the majority again if we don't get this done. But I don't think there'll be very many Democrats that will join us in cutting spending. They've always wanted to grow government. We've always wanted to slow the growth of government. Now we have the charge to actually shrink government. And the Democrats that will join with us in shrinking government will be welcomed aboard over on our side. And I would not be surprised if there is a remaining Democrat or two that would switch sides and come over to this party because they will have learned that their party has left them. And the votes that from the Democrats that were for others other than Nancy Pelosi today for Speaker tell you the level of discontent in the Democrat caucus.
Which Democrats do you suspect might leave the party?
Well, I don't have names on that at this point. I'm just looking at the political dynamics, and it's not the conversations with them that would be a privileged conversation anyway. It's watching the dynamics of this, and what was that, 18 Democrats refused to vote for Nancy Pelosi? I think that was the number. Heath Schuler got 11 votes. He got a lot more votes in their closed-door session for Speaker. So let's watch that. I think there'll be a good chance that there can be a couple of Democrats come over to our side.
A new Gallup poll shows President Obama's approval at an 8-month high. Could that hinder the Republican agenda?
Well, it will. Anytime the president's approval rating goes up, it's harder on our agenda. When his approval rating goes down, even if ours is going down alongside it, which it did, it was better for our agenda. But you know, we're in this flux, this transition time, and I think that kind of polling is something that's not. It's so much a movable target. When you have the transition from the Democrat majority in the House to the Republican majority in the House, Nancy Pelosi hands over the gavel to John Boehner. When you look at the president's approval rating, it's within the context of the transition of power in the House. It's going to mean a lot more in 3 months or 6 months when we actually get our agenda up and going and the press starts to report to the public what's going on in this Congress.
Who do you support heading into the 2012 presidential election cycle?
When it comes to president, where I am with this is that I want to facilitate debate. I want to invite the presidential candidates into Iowa. I want to give them all the access that I can help provide. And I want to help with the debate, the national debate that we need to be in. I think right now our presidential candidates are weak in foreign policy. I don't know anybody that stands out in foreign policy at this point. I have not seen a bold candidate that supports the fair tax. I haven't heard one candidate voice the solid position that we must have on border security and on immigration. So as we go down the line of these issues, I think that my ear is tuned, and I'm looking forward to talking to the candidates, listening to their positions, push and probe and see where their convictions are. We'll have to learn in Iowa, then New Hampshire and South Carolina, where their souls are. And that's what this is about. It's way early, and I want to be engaged in this debate and help facilitate it for the presidential candidates.
All right, Representative Steve King from Iowa's 5th Congressional District, thanks so much for joining us. It's always good talking to you here on Newsmax TV.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.